There are a million Souls-likes in the gaming space today. A lot of them just blend into one as they don't do anything significant to stand out. What brought my attention to the First Berserker Khazan was primarily its art style, but I'm also a fan of these types of games. From Software are one of my favorite developers and their quality is extremely difficult to replicate. The most recent example would have been Lies of P, but outside of this, the list is very small. Developer Neople are known for Dungeon Fighter Online, so this project is a completely new direction. Does Khazan have more to offer, or does it just fade into the background with all the other generic Souls impersonators? What's up? How's it going, people? Welcome to Casual Gamer Reviews. If you enjoy this content and want to see more, then please leave a like and subscribe, or if you don't like it, then please leave a thumbs down and let me know how I can be better for you. The First Berserker Khazan took me a staggering 60 hours to complete, reviewed on Xbox Series X. In the First Berserker, you play as the titular character Khazan, and if you are used to From Software's formula, this game will immediately feel familiar to you. You have a fast attack, a heavy attack, are limited to a stamina bar, have limited health potions, and resting at a checkpoint will replenish your health and resources, but also reset enemies. Defeating enemies will give you a currency you can spend to level up, and if you die, you will drop this currency. Even the consumables are pretty much the same, with elemental buffs that can be applied to weapons, potions to give resistances and remove status effects, throwables to do light damage, and so on. You also have a dodge and deflect, and surprisingly they are both viable to use. You don't often see that in these types of games. Hell, Dark Souls itself is inconsistent with both its dodge and parry across titles. You may be thinking at this point, what makes the First Berserker different? And that is a good question. There are actually several differences between those titles and this one. First is the gear. In Khazan you are limited to 3 weapon types: dual wield, spear, or greatsword. Each of these scale with their own 2 stats, so they are still important for particular builds. Greatswords being naturally slower and heavier, spears being quick, and dual wields being balanced. The gear then extends onto armors and jewelry. You can have 5 pieces of armor equipped, which are split into helmets, body, gloves, greaves, and boots. Then you can also have an amulet and a ring. This gear system has a couple of very glowing positives, but also an undeniable negative. The first positive is the set bonuses. The First Berserker has an impressive amount of gear sets with well over 50 to find. Gear sets provide bonuses based on how many items of that set you are wearing. Some of them stack up to 6 items across weapons, armor, and jewelry, but some can be as low as 2 items, so you can sometimes even mix and match. These bonuses can give you extra damage, increased stamina recovery, elemental buffs, higher damage output against certain enemy types, and so many more things. They can really bolster your builds, and some are so geared towards defeating certain bosses that it may even force you to try something new, which I don't dislike in games like this. The second positive is the rarity system. This isn't the system that is new by any stretch of the imagination, but I liked the implementation of it in this game. There are 5 rarities you can get from common through to epic, and each of these stages gives the item a random attribute. For example, common items will have no random attributes, uncommon will have 1, rare will have 2, and so on. When you get to epic rarity, you have 1 fixed attribute and 3 random attributes. These attributes can be anything from increased damage, stamina or crit percentage, to stat and speed increases. They really add another layer of complexity that ultimately benefits the game. But that does lead me into my negative point about the gear. There's just so much of it. You are constantly picking them up from every enemy kill, every chest, every little back alley hidden item, that it is very easy to get overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of it. As soon as I settled on a weapon and armor set, I would find a better one almost immediately, and to be honest, that was just exhausting to keep up with, and I eventually just didn't. Given the number of sets they have, I think it would have been more than enough to have one of these sets in each rarity. You can upgrade your gear in 2 ways. The first is the attribute swap, in which you can spend Lacrima, this game's souls, to roll a dice at getting new attributes. This system I did really like, as you can get right in the weeds with the customization. If I got an epic weapon and I liked 2 of the 3 attributes, I could take a dice roll on that 3rd attribute to cycle through and get one that I wanted. The other upgrade path was just your normal upgrade of increasing base damage, defense, and level. This system I did not like. I actually thought it to be pointless. In order to increase the level, you have to break down another item of gear from the same category. That's all fine and dandy, but it would literally raise it by 1 or 2 damage damage or defense points. There is no point wasting your time on that when you are constantly finding new gear out in the world. The second main difference in Khazan is the extensive skill trees. By default, this game maps its heavy and light attacks to the face buttons as opposed to the usual shoulder buttons. You can obviously change the button mapping, but I would advise against it because the shoulder buttons are tied to the skills. These skills I found to be essential for survival throughout the course of the game, especially against bosses. There are basic skills which tied to Khazan himself and his abilities like a deflect parry, the brutal attack which is a finishing move, the throwable spear, and later a special ability called phantom form. But there are also skill trees tied to each of the 3 weapon classes which offer skill moves. These skill moves are where the First Berserker really sets itself apart. There are closing the gap moves which launch you forward with deadly force, there's skills that stance break, there's skills that throw you into a flurry of combos, and every one of them can really turn the tide in a tough fight. Each of these use spirit points, and you get spirit points from landing hits, deflecting and dodging incoming hits, and later on you can unlock some skills to increase the options to acquire spirit points. These points can also be spent to use your throwable spear, which means you can almost always have a ranged attack on you, which I thought was a much better system than having to always carry a bow or something like that. The last main difference is stance breaking. The First Berserker's combat relies heavily on stance breaking enemies by draining their stamina. When a stance break occurs, Khazan gets an opening to use a brutal attack, which will finish off most enemies or take a chunk of health away from a boss. There are 2 stamina bars to contend with depending on the enemy type. Non-human enemies will have a static bar much like their health bar, which will slowly be depleted through deflecting attacks and landing hits. Human enemies can be a bit more variable as they have a stamina bar much like the one you have. Their stamina bar decreases when you deflect and land hits, much like with non-humans, but it also decreases when they attack. However, just like you, in periods of rest, the stamina bar will also increase again. Because of this, I generally found human bosses to be more difficult. I briefly glossed over the stats earlier, but Khazan follows the usual RPG mechanics with a system to allocate your currency obtained by killing enemies. There are 5 stats, and these are vitality, endurance, strength, willpower, and proficiency. Vitality focuses on health and resistances, and endurance focuses on stamina. Strength, willpower, and proficiency scale with the weapon type you choose, and they will increase attack power. For example, I was a dual wield build during my playthrough, and this weapon had a primary scaling with willpower and a secondary scaling with strength, so I allocated my points into these 2 stats and completely ignored proficiency. I have to round out this gameplay portion of the review by talking about difficulty. The First Berserker Khazan is absolutely relentless. It is hands down more difficult than Dark Souls, Elden Ring, and Sekiro in my opinion. I had a review earlier in the year where I named 9 Souls as the hardest game I have ever played on its normal difficulty, and I didn't expect to play another contender for this crown so shortly after. I am a self-proclaimed lover of this genre, and with that comes a bit of stubbornness. Yes, Khazan has an easy difficulty, and yes, it offers a spirit summon, but because of my self-inflicted stubbornness, I refuse to use them. I made it all the way to the 4th from last boss before I finally cracked. It got to the point where I was genuinely starting to resent the game because it is so hard. From mid-game, every single boss was taking me hours in attempts to get through, and I understand the try for challenge, but fuck me, that's a bit much, don't you think? Having said that, once I saw the light and dropped the difficulty down to the easy mode, which by the way is a very misleading title because it definitely isn't easy, the game became far more enjoyable for me and lit that fire inside me again. Please heed my advice here and don't let your stubbornness stop you from enjoying this game. Something else that has me divided is the visuals. There are many things for me to gush about, but I also have considerable qualms with them. First, I want to gush, so let me gush up in here. The cel-shaded art style is gorgeous. Every character was fantastically animated and was dripping with style. The monsters were horrifying and gruesome, the humans were elegant, everything just looked great in this artistic expression. That being said, it took dozens of hours of game time to find an armor that I like the look of. What the hell? Khazan looks awesome, but why do all the armor designs suck? I didn't understand that at all. Then there's the level designs. I've heard many argue that this is the game's worst aspect, and I'm inclined to agree. A lot of them are rehashed segments of previous levels or bland bits of land or hallways. Sometimes you will hit a story beat where you get an amazing area to explore like the Imperial Theatre or this awesome chaos infested mine, but then you get levels where it's just a generic bit of a a castle or village that you walk through, the inconsistencies are quite glaring. Also, not really something I would mark the visuals down for, but the standard running animation for Khazan was very strange. His legs would be moving so much faster than the distance traveled, it was almost like he was running on ice or an eternal treadmill. A very odd design choice in my opinion. The audio on the other hand was not contentious at all. From top to bottom I thought it was very good. The composer Jae Kwang Lee seems to be Neople's in-house composer, and I couldn't find any of their other notable works, but they made a solid OST here. Each track is very cinematic and matches the scale of the over-the-top cutscenes and boss fights, which always served as the perfect accompaniment to a tense battle. The voice acting is led by Ben Starr as Khazan and Anthony Howell as the Blade Phantom. Ben Starr is in pretty much everything now, and there's a reason for that, but just in case you don't know who he is most known for playing Clive in Final Fantasy XVI and most recently Verso in Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Anthony Howell is best known for playing Cyril in Final Fantasy and Morgott and Margit in Elden Ring. They are both excellent at playing the leads, but the whole voice cast is high quality, so they deserve their praise for sure. Earlier I said that I agreed with the calls of the worst aspect of this game being the level design. Well, it turns out I lied, because the real worst aspect in my eyes is the story. Khazan is a revenge story that is incredibly generic and is constantly throwing new characters at you that makes it hard to keep up. At the beginning of the game you make a pact with the seemingly evil Blade Phantom in order to get enough power to complete your revenge mission. You then get to a point where every other person you fight is supposed to have some impactful backstory that led to your downfall, but none of it hits, as I had no connection to any of the characters. I can't feel betrayal or sacrifice or loss if I don't even know the character's name. They all just blend into one and become irrelevant. It got to the point where I stopped paying attention entirely, so I couldn't even tell you the story in full, and that's not a good thing. When I did get to the big fight at the end, the big bad's reasoning for doing what they did was just so stereotypical to a revenge story, and it didn't have any impact on me at all. I know it's not fair to make the comparison, but if you're gonna make a game like this, then you're gonna get the comparison. From Software's storytelling and lore is unmatched and seeps into all elements of the game. For the First Berserker to have a story that serves no purpose outside of having to explain every boss fight, it's just disappointing. The First Berserker is actually packed with side and bonus content. When I first picked the game up, I expected it to be a smaller title, maybe coming in at around 30 hours, but it took me double that time to complete. This is partly due to the hours spent on bosses, as I said, but also because there are 24 side missions. This game works on a mission structure where you choose a mission at the hub world and are thrown into a linear level that always ends in a boss. There are main missions you need to progress the story, but then also these 24 side missions. These side missions varied in quality greatly though. Almost all of the time they reused areas from main mission levels and also reskinned bosses. They were all also pretty short and for the most part unfulfilling. Not all of them though, as some had rare loot, but I did feel like the game would benefit from having much less of these. Then there are two different collectibles to get. The first are soul stones, which can be found, usually in multiples, in every level. These can be used to level up Lacrima Gain and increase the health recovery your healing item provides. Every now and then it will also let you level up your spirit point bar, which is an absolute must as the skills are game changing. The second collectible is Danjin's Jarlings. Danjin is a jar enthusiast, and if you find his Jarlings out in the world, you can buy special jar helmets from him, which are some of the best headgears in the game. These offer intense stat upgrades and focus on each of the 3 builds, so you can benefit from them no matter your skill allocation. Finally, much like any game of this genre, there is of course New Game Plus modes for successive playthroughs, and also a boss memory mode which allows you to retry fighting any of the bosses. The First Berserker Khazan is a Souls-like through and through, but it does bring some fresh new things to this saturated genre. It has solid, albeit ruthless combat with a great skill system and plentiful gear sets. The art style is gorgeous and the audio quality is high, but sadly all of these positives are held back by the negatives. It has a forgettable story, excessive loot, unfulfilling side quests, and often poor level design. There is a really fun game in here for sure, but I do feel like it didn't quite meet its full potential. The First Berserker Khazan gets a casual gamer score of 7.5 out of 10. It's been summer showcase season and I did a breakdown of the 3 major events, so check them out on the channel for all the biggest announcements. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and if you didn't like it, please leave a thumbs down and I'll try to be better next time. Let me know what you thought of Khazan in the comments below, and for everything else Casual Gamer, keep it here. Peace and love.